The American philosopher Ayn Rand, who you probably know for her novels The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, among others, and maybe her nonfiction books, Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal, and The Virtue of Selfishness, not only wrote beautiful fiction, beautiful soul-fueling fiction, she also created a philosophy for freedom and flourishing, for these two things that we want in life, these two big master values, as I call them. And her philosophy is a secular philosophy. It's based in reason, observation, and logic. And I want to talk today about her philosophy, about how it relates to these two values, freedom and flourishing, and how it can help us to much more effectively pursue and protect these things. In regard to freedom, Rand provided a moral and philosophic grounding for this value. She provided a whole system of ideas that anchor the idea that freedom is morally good and factually so. And in regard to flourishing, she provided a system of principles to help us think clearly, live beautifully, and love our lives. So these are the two things I want to isolate and focus on. We'll take freedom first. So what is freedom? What is liberty or freedom? Well, it's at the political level, if we're talking political freedom, which is what we mean here, it means freedom from force. It's freedom from coercion. In a state of freedom, you are free to act on your judgment, to engage with others only voluntarily, right, by persuasion, not by coercion. So this is what freedom is at the political level. There's other kinds of freedom. There's free will and different uses of that concept. But at the political level, that's what freedom is. Well, is this a good thing? Should we be free? Well, good and should are moral terms. So right out of the bat, as soon as we ask, are these good, or should we pursue or protect or even have these things, we're dealing with morality on some level. I mean, there's a political element to it. Should we be free? There's the political element. But should we be free? There's the moral element. So Rand points out that you've got to get into moral arguments, because if you don't have a moral case for freedom, you're giving up the case for freedom. So what is the answer to the question, is freedom good? Well, the traditional concept that deals with this question is the concept of rights. You have a right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. You have a right to be free from force. But as soon as you bring up the question of rights, or the concept of rights, then we're faced with the question, all right, well, so that's the theory, but are these things real? Do we really have rights? Or are they just made up? And that's an important question too, because if the theory is that, well, rights are the moral reason that we should be free, and you don't have anything undergirding rights and pointing to why they're real, then you still don't have a case for freedom. The traditional approach to the question of are rights real comes basically threefold. So one school of thought says, yes, they're real and they come from God. Another school of thought says, yes, they're real and they come from the government. A third school of thought says, yes, they're real and they come from nature. And then there's a fourth school, of course, that says they're not real. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But let's take these three theories of rights being real and see what the problem is with each, because I think there is a big problem with each. The first idea, that rights come from God, is problematic because in order to prove that you have rights that come from God, you first have to prove that God exists, right? There's no getting around that. And to put it mildly, that's a very tall order. Right? Nobody has proven that there's such thing as a God, which is why all of the religions have the concept of faith. All the religions who claim that there's a God and they know there's a God, they have the concept of faith as their means of knowing that. Faith meaning belief in the absence of evidence. It's the opposite of reason. Reason and faith are opposite concepts, and the reason that we have both concepts is because one refers to reason on the basis of evidence, reason, and the other to belief on the basis of no evidence, faith. So the whole idea that rights come from God is problematic on multiple other levels in addition, by the way, because some religions say, well, my God says if you don't believe in him, I should kill you. And how are you going to come back to that if faith is the means of knowledge? So you get the idea. It's just chaos if you move in that. And we live in this chaos today, by the way. This is precisely. This isn't just theory. Look around. People are, my God says this, your God says that. So that's not going to get us anywhere. Hugely problematic theory of rights, that they come from God. The next theory, the idea that rights come from government, is equally problematic. It's a complete bastardization of the concept of rights. The whole reason that we need the concept of rights is because there's something different than government and law. Right? We already have a concept, law. That's what the government says you may and may not do. A law can be legitimate or illegitimate. The concept of rights is more fundamental than that. It's a moral concept, and the whole point of that concept is to say, prior to government, you have a moral prerogative to act in a certain way. As the American founders put it, governments are formulated to protect rights. They don't create rights. Rights are more fundamental. They're supposed to inform us about what governments may and may not do, about what laws are legitimate and what laws are not. So the idea that rights come from government is a complete bastardization of the concept of rights. It equates them with laws, and it also means that governments can do anything they want. If rights come from government, so you live in Nazi Germany and you're Jewish, well, your right is to walk into this oven. That's what you have to do. So that's chaos and hell and all other forms of awfulness. Not going anywhere with that. So the very seductive idea now that rights come from nature, or that we have them naturally, that sounds great if you can prove it. But if you can't prove it, then we're stuck where Jeremy Bentham said, rights are nonsense upon stilts because there's no evidence for them. Or as Alistair MacIntyre puts it, rights, the idea of rights, the idea of inalienable rights, is one with witches and unicorns because there's equal evidence for both. And if you think about it, I mean, if you're looking for rights out there, evidentially, cut me open, they're not in here. Start looking around out here, they're not out there. So where are these things? And this is the problem. If you can't prove that you have rights, if you can't show the evidence for rights, then you can't actually have a strong, solid foundation for arguing that we have them. Rand has a completely different approach to rights. Instead of saying they come from God, or they come from government, or they come from nature, we know not how, she says, in effect, let's look at the reason we even need this idea of rights. What is it saying we have a prerogative to do? Well, the traditional idea is you have a prerogative to act on your judgment. Life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, they're all verb related, right? You have a right to live your life. You have a right to produce property and keep and use and dispose of it, all verbs. You have a right to pursue happiness, right? These are all verbs, they're actions. All right, well, why would we need these kinds of actions? Well, let's look at what kind of animal we are. What is it that we do in order to live as the kind of animal that we are? And Rand points out that the fundamental means of human survival is the use of our rational faculty, the thing that makes us distinct from all of the other animals. This is very Aristotelian, if you know Aristotle's philosophy. We have a rational faculty. It's our means of figuring out what's true, what's false, what works in reality, how we can put things together to make the values that we need in order to live, from food, clothing, and shelter to free societies and rights-protecting governments, right? This is the faculty that enables us to do that. And so, in order to live as the kind of animal we are, a rational animal who lives for decades, not a moment, and who has all sorts of needs, not only physical, but also spiritual, friendship, self-esteem, purpose, the things that constitute a human life, in order to live as that kind of being, we need to be free from the one thing that can stop us from acting on our judgment. That thing is force, coercion. If you put me in a cage, I can't go do the thing I planned to do today. If you tie me to a tree and leave me there, I can't go fishing or build a hut or whatever else I plan to do today. Force obviously stops us from acting on our judgment. It stops us from living as the kind of being that we are, a rational being. So this is just an observational fact that given the kind of animal that we are, we need to be free. So you can think of this as an objective theory of rights in this sense. It is true that rights are an idea. So they're made up in a sense, just like every idea is. It's made in the head. There's the in here part. But there's an out there part too. There's a fact that we're recognizing when we talk about rights. What is that fact? We're recognizing the fact that given the kind of animal we are, we need to be free to act on our means of living, our mind, our judgment. This is not a faith-based theory of rights. It's not coming from the government, and it's not from nature we know not how. It's from nature that we observe. We can see it. Think about how powerful this is. How much more powerful would the liberty movement be if everyone in the movement sort of understood this idea and was like, look, there's a fact why we should be free. This isn't an opinion. It's a moral fact. The whole reason that we need the concept of rights is because it's what enables us to live as human beings. A human life is a life guided by the judgment of one's mind. This is why slavery is wrong. If that weren't true, slavery wouldn't be wrong. That's the why. So you see the value of this. It's just one of the elements of Ayn Rand's philosophy, is this hugely powerful lever that we have here to advance liberty, to explain to people why freedom is moral, and to provide our movement with a really solid grounding. Now I want to talk a little bit about Ayn Rand's view of flourishing, or as she would just put it, living. Living as what? As the kind of being that we are. You can't live as an eggplant or a rock because the rock's not even alive and you're not an eggplant, right? You're a human being. What does it mean to live as a human being? The concept of flourishing is beautiful because it implies living fully in accordance with the kind of thing that you are and living successfully. You think about a flower flourishing. What does that mean? It means it's, doing beautifully. If you see a wilting flower, you don't say that flower is flourishing, right? So it's a nice concept. Rand didn't use it, but I think it captures what she means by fully living or living. And what Rand provided in regard to this master value, living a beautiful life or living fully or flourishing, is a system of principles based in the factual requirements of the kind of being that we are, rational beings. What does it mean to live as a human being? And so she's got a whole system of values and virtues, values being things you go after in order to live, food, clothing, shelter, friendship, romance, recreation, love, freedom, all values, things you go after because you need them to live. And then virtues, or the actions that you must take in order to achieve these life-serving values, such as be rational, so rationality. Be productive, you have to produce values in order to live. Say's law, right? Supply constitutes demand, or you have to make products to have products, right, as Elon Musk puts it. And then trade with others rather than beat them over the head to get their stuff. Why? Because if you're all producing and trading, we all get rich, right? And live well. That's the way that human beings can flourish. So she has this whole system of ideas that help us to think more clearly about what it means to live a human life, to pursue our values efficaciously, to engage in interactions with other people in a harmonious way rather than an acrimonious way, or rather than through violence. And so this is another element of Rand's philosophy, is that she provides a system for people to flourish, both on the individual level and socially. So personal flourishing and social harmony, you can put it that way. Now, Rand is controversial, as you know. I'm sure you all, she's got a book titled The Virtue of Selfishness. And So she's very controversial, and she comes down hard on emotionalism and faith and other ways, alleged ways of knowing that are not reason. But what Rand means by selfishness is rational selfishness, pursuing your values to make your life great and respecting the rights of others to do that too. That's selfishness. Selfishness, what would it mean if, hey, myself, I want to make myself great? Well, that's exactly how you do it. You don't make yourself great by stabbing others in the back. Look at people who do that. They wind up in jail or in gangs, getting shot or whatever. That's not life. Life is production and trade and engagement using our rational faculty. Now, emotions obviously are hugely important in life. There's no point in living if you can't experience joy and love and all that kind of stuff. But your emotions are not your means of living, says Rand. They're your psychological means of experiencing your values, right? Your favorite team wins a game. You're happy. Why? Because that's your team. You have a value judgment. I love this team. They won. If they lost, you feel bad. If you bet a lot of money on the game, you feel worse, right? That's what it means for... that's the difference between your emotional faculty and your rational faculty. They're both mental faculties. They're both in there in kind of the same place. We just need to keep them separated in terms of what their roles are. There's nothing wrong with emotions. Objectivism, I like to say, is 100% pro-emotion and 100% pro-reason at the same time. We say, treat each of these mental faculties exactly as it is all the time. Don't ever pretend that your emotions are your means of knowing or that reason is your means of experiencing your values. They're just different things. So this is Rand's idea, and think about how beautiful this is. The whole thing just fits together perfectly, doesn't it? We have rights. Why? Because it's a fact that to live as human beings, we have to be free to act on our judgment. That is an observable fact. And there's a moral code undergirding that explains also the way to do that thing, the way to live. So the moral code gives us principles telling us, hey, be honest, be just, treat people according to the facts and according to what they deserve. Bad guys who try to kill people should go to jail. Good people who produce and trade should be free to go do that thing, right? It's got all these principles that just work for human life. And you've got a moral code integrating with a rights theory and a whole reason for freedom plus a whole system for living. This is what Ayn Rand gave us. It's beautiful. So she's controversial. You know what? When something's controversial, we should look into it and say to ourselves, well, is it true? Is it true? And will these ideas work to make our lives wonderful? I think Rand is exactly what the liberty movement needs. So I encourage you to read Rand's books. This is the first most important thing. Read Rand and read her critically. Look, use your rational faculty. She'd be the first to tell you, don't take anything on faith. Read her books critically, but read them and see what you think. So read, for instance, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, her novels. They're just wonderful stories about wonderful people doing amazing things and villains too. But it's really powerful novels. And read her nonfiction and engage with people, talk about it. My institute, Objective Standard Institute, teaches courses on Rand's philosophy and philosophy in general, so it was not all about Rand. But we teach courses on her ideas and how they integrate with other ideas, other thinkers, economic thinkers, other philosophers, self-development thinkers such as Cal Newport and James Clear and the like. So we're all about integrating really good, deep philosophical ideas like Rand's with practical everyday living and with our efforts to advance liberty. So check out objectivestandard.org if you're interested in taking some courses there on these ideas. And I think we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the very good speech. I am a Nietzsche reader, and I think Ayn Rand understand that selfishness is a virtue because of it is impossible to have a really big and powerful community when the individuals are weak and are needing one to the other from the others. And then we have this Jesus, what Jesus say to love the other as yourself. And you have that same in Adam Smith's work. Why it is so controversial for liberals to accept the good side of selfishness?
Yeah, great question. Why is it so difficult for people to accept that selfishness is good? And I think the reason is that we're all raised to believe that morality equals self-sacrifice, that they're the same thing. To be moral is to sacrifice for other people, right? So Rand called this a frozen abstraction. It's like taking the whole field of morality and pretending that this one theory of morality, altruism, that you should sacrifice for others, that equals this whole field. And she said that's wrong. There are other theories in the field, hedonism, egoism, other theories. And the question is, which of these theories is supported by facts, if any of them are? Altruism simply isn't supported by facts. There are no facts of reality that give rise to the idea that you must sacrifice for others. You can't find them anywhere. They don't exist. There are facts all over the place to say that if you want to live as a human being, you must act in accordance with your nature. You must go by reason. You must figure out what's true. You must engage voluntarily and peacefully with others. Facts abound to demonstrate this. So the problem is that we've been ill-taught, and she's pushing against a huge, heavily grounded idea in the history of philosophy and religion has really done this. You mentioned Jesus and Christianity. And the idea that you should love your neighbor just, in general as some kind of a commandment, thou shalt love your neighbor. Well, what if your neighbor is an axe murderer, right? That doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't just love people just out of the blue. You should treat people in accordance with the facts. What are the facts about this person? This is Rand's whole idea. She condemned the idea of judge not that ye be not judged and said, judge and be prepared to be judged. Who has anything to fear from moral judgment? Only the bad guys do, right? If you're a good person, if you're honest and forthright and living well and not violating rights and not being dishonest, you have nothing to hide. You have no reason to fear judgment. Judge me. I'm fine with that. So I think that's the reason, but it's a big reason, right? It's a big hurdle. So again, read Rand, read her book, The Virtue of Selfishness. The first essay in that book, The Objectivist Ethics, explains the essence of her philosophy and why she thinks that human life, the requirements of human life, constitute the standard of moral value, the fundamental that gives rise to all of the other moral principles. And it's really beautiful, clear writing. It's rich, it's dense, but it's clear. So anyway, that's what I recommend, and I thank you for that question. Take more questions? I don't know where we're on time. I'm happy to keep going with questions. So we have several up here.
The last question.
Okay. Okay.
Just one question. Over here. Let's see me.
Yep.
You said regarding moral judgment that the only people that have any incentive to fear moral judgment are the people who have something to be afraid of. Let's take, for example, you, and let's really assume that you have no moral problems. And I conduct moral judgment towards you. I say, oh, this guy is a terrible philosopher. This guy is a terrible public speaker. I am led by some of my personal, more malicious intents. My intent is not to diversify the moral from the non-moral. My intent is to defamate you. My
Yes.
intent is to bully you into social isolation or something like that.
Yeah.
Or don't you then have an incentive to fear moral judgment even though you are not morally incorrect?
Really good question.
Because I'm not led by...
Thank you. Yeah, really good questions. Don't innocent good people have something to fear from moral judgment if that moral judgment is false and malicious or the like? Yeah, there's you can harm people through defamation, slander, and the like, right? And that's bad. It's also a violation of their rights because you own your reputation. You built your reputation. It belongs to you. This is why defamation and libel are illegal in addition to being immoral. They actually violate rights. But we don't really, on another level though, we don't have to fear that moral judgment because all we have to do to people who try to libel or slander us is say, A, where are the facts? You're saying I did some bad thing, where are the facts? Or if you're just expressing your opinion about me, I don't care about your opinion. You might say, well, you're a bad person. I say, I don't care what you think about me. Doesn't make it, I mean, if you give me some facts that I've done something wrong, I'd be like, oh, thank you for telling me that. I'll fix my ways. That's, so even there, moral judgment is good. If somebody can point out that you've erred in some way, that's great news. That's information that you can now correct yourself going forward if they're giving you honest feedback. If they're trying to harm you, then you just say, well, look, I don't care what you think, and if you lie about me to people and harm my reputation, I'll, perhaps see you in court because that's illegal. So I get you. Your question is good. Can't people use judgment in ways that harm people? They certainly can if they use it irrationally. But you have nothing to fear from somebody judging you on the basis of rational values and virtues. Is this person honest? Think about when you go into a business relationship. You want to know whether this person is honest. You don't want to go into business with somebody who's dishonest. God knows what's going to happen, right? So you want to find out if he's honest. You want to judge him, and you want him to judge you so that you guys can figure out what your characters are, what your abilities are, etc. And then you can proceed accordingly. So bottom line on this is that Rand's whole approach to virtues and judgment and the like is that there's factual basis for making these kinds of judgments. And those factual bases are the requirements of human life. What is it that we have to do in order to live? We've got to keep our mind connected to reality. In terms of other people, we've got to judge them accurately and treat them accordingly. Otherwise, you end up with presidents such as Hitler or Putin. Right? And so on every level of human existence, we need to use our rational faculty so that we can live well and love life and maintain liberty. So, thank you all.